I just clicked record so we can flow into the conversation naturally, because I find that the preliminaries often have some gold nuggets in them.
Preliminaries so far are, I don't know how to set up a microphone stand.
Which is exactly why I'm extra excited to have an academic on the show, because just because you know how to hold a microphone doesn't mean that you should be holding said microphone.
That feels like a life lesson right there.
And I'm so thrilled to be doing a part 2 with you. I can't believe that part 1 was back in 2020, which was a time warp, but also so important for beauty culture conversations.
2020 was a rough year. I feel like we don't often get to do a part 2. And a lot of times I'll talk to someone and then later I think, oh, I should have said this, or I could have talked about that. And so how amazing that we're actually getting what amounts to a do-over or an update or a revision.
I'm just so lucky to have stayed in touch and gotten a response from your email, because your book, I recommend it all the time. I actually am very annoyed at my best friend because she didn't give me back my copy in time for this conversation, but I had every intention of like holding it up. My avid podcast listeners know that I talk about Beauty Sick day and night as the one that changed the game for me.
I can't even tell you what that means. Writing a book is so strange. You just kind of throw it out there into the universe, right? It's not like on social media where you get comments and interactions. It's out there and you don't know what's happening with it. So I'm so glad it landed in your hands.
You wrote it over a decade ago now, right? Because it was published in 2017, which means you started writing it before then.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
If there were any revisions you could make to it, or have you changed your mind on anything since writing it?
That's a good question. I was just talking to a group of students the other day about how editing your own work is so important and how you should be embarrassed when you read your old writing. Like everyone I know feels that way. You look at your old writing. I look at writing from a week ago and think like, what were you thinking? So 10 years. Yeah, I've thought about it a lot. I mean, a lot of people ask me, well, things have gotten better now, right? Which isn't really, yeah, that face is correct. That's not really a question so much as like a hope thrown at the universe or something. I don't think things have gotten better. So I don't think I would revise my main thesis, which is that I can't believe I just said thesis. That was like academic alert right there. The main thesis, though, is that our culture's obsession with how women look is making a lot of us a little bit sick. I still think that's true, but I do think I was missing some perspectives when I wrote it. I tried to write a book that would be, I don't know what the right word is for it, maybe not as angry as I felt. Okay? I tried to write a little more straightforward. I wanted it to be something that people could relate to, even if, for example, they didn't have strong feminist values, because I didn't think that was necessary to understand that this is a problem. And so I think as a result of doing that, I hit the middle of the road in some places that I was not really feeling middle of the road. So I look back and I wish I had talked more about how our beauty standards are not neutral, right? I sort of talked about it like we just have these beauty standards and they're unreachable and they're unhealthy for women and all that is true, the end. But they also didn't just come out of nowhere. And so I wish I would have talked more about how you cannot separate beauty standards from things like racism and classism. I write about it in my academic work. I think we're all having a bit of a reckoning with some of those ideas, but yeah, it's embarrassing to me. I should have talked more about that, and I think I should have been more willing to ruffle some feathers. It's always a decision you have to make, right? Do you want to try to have a broad audience, or do you want to speak to the people who really get it?
And that's such a difficult decision to make, because the people who really get it, they get it, and they might not need to read the book as much as the people who don't get it. And that's what casting like a wide net sometimes does. It gives people an in, and it's also actually so serendipitously bizarre, crazy that you bring this up right off the get-go, because I was reflecting over my morning coffee and I was like, when I read Dr. Renee's book the first time, like, I don't remember there being many mentions of the patriarchy. And I didn't know I didn't know if you did that on purpose. I didn't know if I could bring it up in this conversation, if it was just like an academic edit of saying things as they are without adding any, tones that could make it appear unpalatable, which is like a classically like female thing to do.
It is. I will say I don't think I used the word patriarchy, and I think I'd remember if I did, but I also don't believe for a moment that an editor would have left it in. So I think a lot as a teacher, as a science communicator, about the purpose of language. And I try to use language for clarity above all, and as an invitation. And I really meant that book as an invitation for people to start thinking about these issues. And there are words that mean very different things to different people. And words like patriarchy, I know what that means, you know what that means. But a lot of people will see that and think, no. And that's the end, right? And you lose them. And I know a lot of people would say, so what, good riddance. I don't feel that way. I think we learn to speak the language of the bubble we're in, and it can keep us from connecting with people outside that bubble. My students use this word all the time, right? Patriarchy. It's one of a handful of words they like to throw around, sometimes when they don't want to give me a real answer, right? When I'll say, well, what might be contributing to this problem? And they'll just go, patriarchy. And it's like, okay, right? But let's dig in a little more. Let's be more specific. Or sometimes it's just capitalism. I think, yes, and right. And so I did try to stay away from language that would alienate. And I think there are people that would disagree with that move. They'd say, no, say what you mean. You're talking about patriarchy, say patriarchy. But I don't think it means the same thing to everyone.
Well, I want to emphasize two things. One is what you said, that even your early academic research, it has extensively focused on gender differences. And basically, even if you didn't use the exact word in the book, that's what it's talking about. And secondly, your book, Beauty Sick, I mean, the friend that hasn't given me back my copy yet, I'm not saying she's uncomfortable with talking about patriarchy and sexism. I'm just saying that she's not so deep in the rhetoric. It just kind of goes over her head. However, when I handed her your book, she was like, oh my God, this is totally me. This is how I've been feeling, this and that and the other. But she's not hanging out in online forums that are talking about everything that's wrong with patriarchy, capitalism, racism, classism, and all the other isms, right? So I think in that regard, it's very like noble of you to reflect in that way. And also it's made its significant impact for, like we said at the beginning, the people who truly need it the most.
I hope so. I think it's a delicate balance. Even the word, I talk about objectification all the time because there's not another word for it really. I try to avoid jargon words, but I don't have a non-jargon word for that. It would take a paragraph, but even that word can sometimes make people kind of prickly. There are words we use when we talk about cultural problems that feel to other people shaming, or like they're assigning individual blame, when that's not really the purpose of the words. They're meant to be bigger words that capture structures and patterns. But some people, if you say, the sexual objectification of women, they get super defensive, right? Men will say, but I like women. I don't object, right? And women will say, sometimes I want to feel sexy, right? And it becomes this immediate tension.
Well, we don't have to park in politics for too long, but real quick, it does make me think of, I read this hot take about how liberals in America have a messaging problem. We say things, big, bold statements that truly turn people off and end up not creating the change that they're aiming for, because we're so caught up in using big, scary words that, like you said, can be prickly, and that can also make people turn against the message. The quintessential example they used in the article was like, defund the police. Like, that's not really what that means. That means reallocate the resources, but they don't want to say reallocate the resources and then go into a paragraph of explanation, like you said, about objectification.
I know for some people it does mean defund the police.
True.
I think that's a problem with language that we're not honest about enough, is that when a term is important to us, we feel like we own it and we get to decide what it means. But the meaning of language is determined by its use. And so I think we're in this world where we have different groups using terms in really different ways. But as a scientist, one of the first things you learn, especially in social science, is that you have to define your terms. You have to tell people what you mean when you say something. So if I say body image, what do I mean by that? Do I mean how you think about your body, how you feel about your body, what kind of behaviors you're engaging in? And so I do find myself, especially when I hear some of these political discussions, wanting to stop and say, can you define your terms, please? But people don't like that. A lot of language is, it's not always about communicating and reaching out. Sometimes it's about the badge you wear that marks who you are and what your values are. It's complex web for sure. I liked your phrase, parking in politics. Oh. I sometimes park in politics and think I should move my car. So I like that metaphor.
Thank you. Alliteration is something I aim for. Let's define some terms. First, let's start with the title of your book, Beauty Sick. And then if you could use that as a segue into what you mentioned earlier, objectification, and how you specifically use it.
Thank you. So I remember, I should say, first of all, this is the first book I wrote. It may be the only book I write. And I had no idea what I was doing. I feel like a lot of the work you do, Mary, is like, it's very like vulnerable and getting people to be honest. So let me be honest. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how publishing worked. I didn't have a good sense of like when you should push, when you should step back. And I remember having this early conversation with like high ups at the publishing company. And they said, we don't like the title.
Was that the title, Beauty Sick?
It was. And my agent's looking at me like, stay calm, stay calm. And they said, I think it's too negative. And I was like, well, it is negative. It's a really bad thing. It's like you don't write a book about depression and call it happy, right? Like that's just not how it works. And so we went through like all different kinds of ideas, things with language around mirrors, things, with objects, all kinds of stuff. And we landed back at Beauty Sick. And I'm not sure if that was the right thing or not. What I meant to communicate with the term beauty sick was this idea that the way that beauty culture and diet culture and, this sort of nasty sexist way of looking at women as nothing more than body parts, the way we live in that can literally make us sick. That's what I meant to communicate. I was trying to say this is a big deal because for so many people, they hear about beauty pressures and they do this thing where like, well, if you're selfish and vain and self-absorbed, then maybe that bothers you. But the rest of us, we're just fine. I actually had someone tell me once, like, well, I'm a feminist, so I don't worry about things like that. For me, I'm talking about a sickness that lives in the world. And I think some people are like, I'm not sick. And I think, well, I bet you are sometimes, right? I bet we all are sometimes. And it's a matter of assessing it ourselves. So I had to talk about sexual objectification in the book because as much as I hate the jargon, it's what's behind everything. Like when you don't see women as fully human, and let me just say, a shocking number of people don't. You can look into literature just on this topic. Like we just don't see women as human in the same way that we see men as human. And when you don't see someone as fully human, and when you see someone as existing just to be looked at, just as a performance art piece, or just as something to please your eyes or sexually satisfy you, when you see someone like that, you're creating this culture that has downstream consequences that are almost too numerous to count. That would take 10 volumes of Beauty Sick, I suppose. But when people treat you like a thing all the time, that's what I mean by objectification, is that you're literally being treated like an object. If that happens for long enough, you start to see yourself that way too. You can't help but do that. It's natural. It's the same way if somebody says something negative about you over and over and over again, a little part of you is going to start to believe it, right? That voice starts to become your own. And when I hear women say like, oh my God, I'm so disgusting. I can't even stand to look in the mirror. I'm so disgusting. I hate myself. That didn't come out of nowhere. It's not like we're born with like the seed to some terrible plant that will turn into that kind of self-hate, right? That's not a natural outcome unless you consider it an outcome of our culture. And I think that's what I want people to really think about is it feels like shit to be treated like a thing. Like it feels, sorry, can I swear? It feels awful to people. And when you start turning that lens, that gaze in onto yourself, it starts to shape everything you do. It starts to kind of eat up pieces of your mind where you lose attention, you lose focus, you lose some joy. And that's just at the psychological level. That doesn't even get into what it does to your wallet or to the time you have available. That's a long lecture.
Since it's honesty hour, I emailed you because my secret conspiratorial dream was to become one of your students, which we could talk about later. So I'm so here for this lecture, and I know my listeners are too. I want to kind of zoom in and add some specificity. You started by saying we have this culture that sees women as subhuman. And I imagine that, like you said, a man would be like, I love women. And then the student in your class would be like, I'm too feminist. I don't see myself that way. Whatever. So there's different rebuttals. What are some, I don't know if it would be helpful to point to the literature that you mentioned where people see women as not fully human, or what are some like very specific, insidious, the smallest of ways that this, I don't know, starts or is spread?
Well, so I would first start by continuing our little psychology lesson. As a psychologist, we talk a lot about the difference between states and traits. So a trait is like permanent-ish, you know, kind of like your personality. It's pretty consistent. A state comes and goes. It's like your mood, right? It can change on a dime. When we talk about objectification, it's both. So when people say, well, I don't do that, I think, well, I'm not saying you're doing it right now. Maybe you're not doing it right now. We all do it sometimes, and we differ in terms of how chronic it is. So for some people, it's just like background music that never stops, right? They never look at women any other way, or maybe they never look at themselves any other way. But for most of us, we're somewhere in the middle, and there are elements of our culture that can turn that volume up or down. So I think it feels less like a personal affront to people when you talk about it that way, when you're saying, I don't mean this all the time. Like sometimes people will say to me, what do you mean women think too much about how they look? I care about all kinds of things. Of course you do. Like, of course you do. But that doesn't mean that there's not room to move it a little. When we talk about seeing women as objects, some of that literature comes out of cognitive psychology. So this is research looking literally at how we process imagery, and images of women are literally processed more like things, literally. And that's not true of pictures of men. Like that's strange, right? Like there's something worth putting your finger on there. Our gaze patterns reflect this same tendency. So we tend to look at women's bodies more than their faces. Relative to men. You can see it in media imagery. Women are more likely to be shown without a face, like just headless, like just the body, or with their face like turned away or in shadow, whereas men are much more likely to be looking head on. And when we think about connecting with someone, like it's not like, oh, I looked into her breasts and I knew she was my soulmate, right? We don't say that. We talk about the eyes, the face. And so when women's faces are hidden or disappearing, like that's definitely a clue that you're not fully seeing them. So I don't know. I could talk for days about that, but I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, since I recently finished a really dense book about biology and understood maybe 1% of it, to clarify, when you talk about these studies, you're referring to, for example, like a neuro imaging. So people look at images, their brains get hooked up, and different areas of the brain light up depending on how they're processing that information. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And like you said, the media images also of showing headless or like faceless, I think we all have kind of a visual of what that is in movies and TV. So this brings me to, a really big question that I'm sure doesn't have a succinct or straightforward answer, but it's one of those like chicken or the egg things. Like, do we objectify women like this because those are the, images that we're bombarded with, or are those images produced because, the people or the culture creating them just historically thinks about women in this way?
My students hate it when I do this, but the answer is yes, right? I think all of the above. So many psychological processes are reciprocal, right? They feed into each other. I actually do think there are some evolutionary roots here that go back to our sensitivity to evaluating women's likely fertility by looking at them. I think there are deep parts of our history that have probably made us a little more sensitive to how women look compared to how men look, excuse me. So I think that's real. I just don't think it explains this whole problem. So we may have started with this sort of subtle tendency to think more about how women look, to evaluate women more in those terms. But then we have a culture that just turns that up, right, in ways that are just hard to even enumerate. It's a really toxic culture out there. Our online culture in particular, but other elements of our culture too. It was not designed to make people healthy or happy. That's not what it's there for. It's there for making money. And so if you start by objectifying women a little, then those objectified images are interesting to people. They look at them more. They start to see women more that way. It really can feed on itself. If you look, there's a lot of controversy now over whether social media really hurts women's body image. Is that a real link, or is there something different going on? And it just sort of seems like it. And the reason people ask that is because women who have poor body image look at a lot of social media. And so how do we know that that correlation isn't just because people who are already feeling bad about themselves go to social media maybe to try to feel better? Or is it that looking at social media is what makes you feel bad? And it's another example where the answer is both. I think probably a lot of women can look at social media all the time and it doesn't hurt their body image. But for people who are vulnerable, you're going to see different effects.
Well, social media increases the intensity and frequency. So all those same images, like I saw it in the early 2000s, for example, growing up in a magazine, but that would be once a week standing in line at the grocery store because we couldn't afford to bring the magazine home. So I'd just like very quickly absorb it. And then maybe coming home and watching the Tyra Banks show every day at 4 p.m. if you were married at 12. But now the Tyra Banks show isn't just at 4 o'clock Monday to Friday. It's nonstop and it's just amplified, and the effects of it are exponential in that way? ?
You're like the last generation that I think is going to be able to make that distinction between media that was much more opt-in, right? You looked at the magazine for a while, you put it away. You watched a TV show and then it was over and you went and did something else. You hung out with your friends, right? That was a really different landscape than what we see now, which is just it's truly a never-ending feed. I had some students who, this was a long time ago, they would play solitaire online, and they would talk about, did you do that too? Yeah, that was very 2000s thing, right? And they would talk about how if you played it enough, you would close your eyes and still sort of see the cards. And I think about that a lot lately with social media. I think that's what's happening, is that people are scrolling so much that even when you step away, it's like those images are still there. They're still spinning. So yeah, the intensity is insane. And even compared to earlier social media, was less image-based. And when we did have images, they were static. And now we're moving on to, I don't know what the percentage is now, but it's much more video-based, right? So you're not just seeing one image of a body, right? You're seeing it move, you're seeing it dance, you're seeing clothes coming off and on. I see, I don't know if you know Celeste Barber, she does great comedy, sort of mocking a certain genre of, I don't know what to say, beauty influencer or something, model something. And I noticed that a lot of the original videos she posts before she mocks them so beautifully, that you'll see these women like even like zooming in on different areas of their body and panning the camera, almost in a way that they're turning that like sexualized up and down gaze on themselves, right? So this is more intense imagery than even just the static images we had when Instagram started.
This is an interesting point because I think the discussion, of course, it centers around women because it's a cultural obsession with female bodies. And it kind of makes it seem, I'm not saying that you're doing this, but just in general, the way we're talking about, it's making it seem like that Instagram model that Celeste Barber is mocking is deliberately sexualizing herself, and then it's harming young girls, maybe absorbing that and whatever. I don't want to stay in like doom and gloom, but that's the part that I contest with daily, also as somebody who exists and creates content on the internet and just feels very conflicted about the ways in which I'm doing it or not doing it. So do you think that responsibility to maybe alleviating the effects of beauty sickness, is that like up to us? Like, do we have agency over that? Or
so that's two questions, right? The first thing I would say is it up to us? No one else is going to do it, right? So we can't look to the villains to solve the problem, right? We can't look to the people who make money off this problem to suddenly decide to knock it off. That doesn't happen. So we can sit back, right, and just take it, or we can say like, well, maybe I can approach life in a little different way. Maybe it'll help me. Maybe it'll help people I care about.
I like that answer. Can I just say that?
Thanks. I gave a speech to, I can't believe I'm going to say this in a recording. I gave a speech to Northwestern's graduating seniors a couple nights ago. It's like a bar speech. It's not a formal speech. It's like a rah-rah advice speech, and they're all drinking. So it's that kind of setting. It's kind of fun. So I was thinking a lot, like I had given that speech 10 years ago, and same thing, you look back at your old writing and you're embarrassed. And I looked back at my old speech and I thought, good God, woman, like what were you thinking? So 10 years ago, I said things like, you got to go out there and change the world. And you're the ones who have to fix all the shit we messed up, right? Like change the world, change the world. And I find that message so exhausting now. I think we need to stop telling young people like that they must do these huge things to change the world, because that's not how world change happens for the most part. And so I thought, well, how can I communicate this? And so I gave them this quote from Game of Thrones, which also embarrasses me, but I really like this quote. So it's two dudes talking. It's Sir Davos Seaworth, for those of you who are into this. I don't know. Are you a Game of Thrones person, Mary?
No, Dr. Renee, I'm going to Croatia this summer to see King's Landing.
All right, then I don't feel bad about this at all. It feels like a setup. Okay, so he's talking to, I think, Jon Snow, right? And Jon Snow was like, oh my God, why did all this happen? Why this? Why that? And Sir Davos is like, who knows? Nobody knows. Like, you pick up the shit that you can. And that was his line. Like, you just keep going. We don't know why. You pick up the shit that you can. And so I think some people have this idea that you have to have a grand solution before you can start picking up any shit. No, just start picking up some of the shit right now. And if what that means is for you unfollowing some people, just do it, right? Or if it means for you that you're going to start thinking more about like how you post and why you post, that's picking up some shit. Like just do it. So, I mean, I think there's this tendency to say like, well, we didn't cause this problem. Like, it's not my fault that I live in a culture where my primary source of power is looking sexy. That's just where I am. And I think, yeah, that's not your fault, but you get to decide what to do with it. Like, you get to decide whether you want to lean into that. And I understand the choice, right? I understand that choice. It is a real source of power. It can be money. It can be a platform. It can be a way for you to get to do other things. Like, I think that's true. But I worry about what happens long term. I think a lot about, not talking about you here, I promise, Mary, I promise. But the kind of influencer whose whole platform is built on, quite frankly, looking sexy, right? And there might be some other stuff there too, but it's mostly about sex appeal. We're all going to get older if we're lucky. I hope, right? We will. You don't get to stay in that world forever. And so if you want to use that world, you can, but I just really wonder how empty it feels, how scary it feels when you look in the mirror one day and you say, holy shit, I'm middle-aged, right? Like that's going to happen. And you can delay it as long as you can, you know, you can do some Botox and you can diet chronically and you can do whatever you want, but you're not going to stay young forever. And so I guess this is a long way of saying that my issue is not with women using their sexuality as a source of power. I think that is a natural outcome in this culture. I don't know how we could expect anything different. My concern is when you do too much of that, what are you not building up in the background? If all your success hinges on looking a certain way, what happens when you no longer look that way? I think that must be terrifying to a lot of people. Like being young, being sexy, that's a privilege. A lot of people never get the sexy part, right? They're never received by culture that way. But even though we all get to be young, we don't get to keep it. Like I think, what do you want to look back on? I don't know. This is too much graduation speech mode.
I feel so lucky and privileged, truly. Yeah. Well, because it's encouraging, you know, my mind goes so many different directions, one of which is I have queued up the longer version of the Marilyn Monroe documentary. And sometimes I wonder, I don't know too much about her, to be honest. I think some people love her, others hate her. She's way before my time, so I don't know much enough for like a critique, but I'm sure that ate away at her, even though she was able to use it brilliantly and to manipulate men to her advantage. And sometimes I'm the one cheering people on that are doing that, you know, like I believe sex work is work and it's important, you know, in a culture that needs sex, I guess. I don't know. Like and then I think about the darkness that we all know Marilyn Monroe faced toward the end of her life. And I wonder if a big part of it related to that. And then as you were talking about how we all age, I mean, aside from that, I'm somebody who built like a little platform and a career when I was 17 on that, like, I was a baby on that like sex appeal, and I was bodybuilding and doing these bikini shows, which is just so disgusting, sickening to look back upon. And then I gained weight. I don't know if the number even matters, but I gained a little bit of weight, enough to not be perceived as this tiny little thing anymore. And even that alone sent me into just the darkest place of my life.
What it does is causes you to actually feel like less of a human yourself. The word that I've been thinking about a lot, like about where I want my research to go and what I want to work on, is the word performance. Right? I think a lot about how we perform more in some settings than others. And I think about how relaxing and delightful it is when we don't have to perform. Like, do you have a friend who's the friend that you like never have to perform in front of?
Yeah, I would say my husband is probably, yeah, it's my friend. He's my friend.
That's pretty cool. And like, you think about how relaxing that is, like it makes you feel whole when you can be around people like that. Maybe a few years ago, a friend of mine from work gave me this pair of sweatpants, just like because she had some and she thought they were soft, and I like soft pants, right? So it was just, there's like gray sweatpants. Nice friend, right? And so I called him out of, like, now I really think about it, I called them friend pants, more just because like my friend gave them to me. But they're so comfortable that when I get home from work, especially if I'm stressed, the first thing I want to do is put on my friend pants. And now, like, even when I get home, like, my partner will be like, oh, hey, how are, and they'll look at me, I'll be like, go put on your friend pants, right? And so I started to think about friend pants as more of a psychological state than a wardrobe choice. That there are people you can be around where it's like, yes, I'm in my friend pants now. Like, I don't have to worry about my hair or my makeup. I don't have to be super, super careful with my language. I don't have to sit like a lady. I don't have to worry that anyone's taking pictures, right? I can just be in my friend pants. I think that is where we flourish. That's where our minds are at ease, like where we're most creative, most comfortable, most happy. And performing on social media, I got to tell you, I think it's the opposite of friend pants. here we are. We're on video for a podcast. This still feels pretty friend pants to me. That's thanks to you in part. Also because I'm kind of at a point in my life where I refuse to dress up, so that helps as well. I'm wearing friend pants, Mary.
Are you wearing the friend pants?
I'm not wearing the friend pants, but here, that's classy, right? I definitely am wearing friend pants. What do you have on?
This is the level of friend pants I'm on.
That is amazing. That's like, right. You can breathe metaphorically and literally.
And literally, for those who are not watching on video, I just stood up and showed Dr. Renee, this professor who I admire and look up to very much, my unbuttoned, unzipped, all the way down pants that I'm sitting in as I'm speaking to her.
I've done a lot of podcasts. That's my favorite moment. I love it. Because it's like sometimes friend pants is no pants.
What if I stood up like butt ass naked?
Like, I got nothing. I'm like letting everything breathe today. Oh my God, I haven't cried on a podcast before. Thank you.
Oh, it's perfect. Well, I was going to say only a psychology professor would take a pair of sweatpants that your friend gave to you and turn it into this grand life lesson. And I love that. And I think we all deserve to have friend pants. We all deserve to have friends who give us pants, but friends who make us feel like we're wearing our most comfortable pair of pants.
I feel like I should interrupt. Do you have listeners in the UK? Because we should clarify trousers.
Yeah, friend trousers. Maybe that'll catch on. Who knows? Well, okay, performance. This is so important and on my list of things to talk about. So I saw a post, and I actually follow this non-binary body image coach who talks about putting on makeup. I think their name is Jessie Nealand. Actually, I don't know about their gender identity or any of that. I just remember a post that I saw from long ago talking about how, in a sense, the femininity is a performance. We have to add to ourselves. We have to modify ourselves. So we have to paint our faces. We have to curl our hair. And sometimes as I'm getting ready, those words like ring in my head. And I'm like, I'm just getting ready for my drag show, except my drag show is daily and not like nightly in an underground club. On the flip side, masculinity is kind of defined by its like lack of actions, like existing in the natural state. So like not shaving, not wearing makeup, not having hair to style, an ode to my cute bald husband, though he does spend a lot of time shaving his head. But anyway, men are rewarded for existing in their natural states, and women are rewarded through social validation for altering like their natural.
Well, so I should first say too, I get a lot of pushback where people are like, wait, I like putting on makeup. I like the performance of it. And I think, okay, performing when you know you're performing and when you're choosing to perform, I think that feels different than when you have to perform or when you perform so much you don't know the difference anymore. And that last thing is what really worries me, is how many young women in particular are performing so much that they don't even get to develop something besides the performance. But okay, is masculinity about the not doing? Maybe, right? Masculinity is also lifting weights and getting big. And masculinity is a physical performance in terms of how you hold your body, how you present your body. And it is a performance in terms of being tough and being invulnerable, right? But I think you're right that, yeah, the performance of femininity is a project, right? It's there many years ago. It's a book from the 90s that is great called The Body Project by Bromberg. And she talks about like young girls and this beauty work is this ongoing project, right? It's never ending. It is exhausting. And she didn't say this, but I'll add it. It's never going to be over because you're never going to be good enough, right? And so part of that project is fashion. And I'm so glad you asked about that. Obviously, I'm thinking about friend pants a lot lately. And part of why I've been thinking about friend pants is because a few years ago, I wrote an op-ed, which was not a big deal. this sounds so silly now given everything going on in the world, but it was about the shoe emoji. I don't know if you remember this controversy. So there's actually a group that determines the official emojis. Yes, who knew? But they're out there. And at the time, if you were on your phone and you wanted to put an emoji for a women's shoe, the only option was a stiletto, like a tall red stiletto. And so there was a woman who had petitioned to have like a little ballet flat added, like so that, and it was just sort of,
Progress.
I mean, it was just kind of this cute thing. And so I wrote an op-ed about like, hey, let's take this seriously though. Like there's a problem with heels. I had said some line about women's clothing being less comfortable than men's. And the editor was like, oh, do you have some evidence for this? And I like, first of all, I appreciate a careful fact-checking editor, but also, seriously? Evidence that women's clothing is less comfortable than men's? I just wanted to be like, the world is the evidence. Yeah. But I thought, okay, that's fair. Like, let's get some data. And so I worked with a student to get data on what we called PDR clothing, which is painful, distracting, or restricting. We wanted to know, like, well, just how often are women wearing this kind of clothing compared to men? Now, anyone who can see in the world knows that women do this way more, and that is, in fact, what we found. But, I mean, some of it is just shocking. Like, so we looked at items like wearing shoes that cause pain or blisters, wearing clothing that leaves welts on your body when you're done with it. The one that really gets me is clothing where you can't take a full breath. I'm like trying to breathe even as I say it. It sounds so awful. And the fact that we consider that normal, that's normal if you want to be sexy in women's fashion, that you might not be able to breathe. You might not be able to bend over. You might not be able to stand. You might not be able to run if you need to run. And so why is it that the people who unfortunately might be the most likely to need to run away to safety are going to be wearing shoes on which they can barely stand, right? To me, this means something. It's worth looking at.
Yeah, it's dystopian.
We also asked people, like, if you wear these kind of clothes, why? And it was interesting. Men do too. Like, men, like, ties are very uncomfortable, although everyone in fashion will tell you that ties are disappearing, right? So this is not really something most men have to wear. Our men would talk about if you go to a wedding and you have to wear a jacket and it's hot, that's annoying. Right. So like, yeah, they had some example. Let's see your face. But mostly men would say they wore these kind of clothes when they did because they had to.
So that like choosing when and where to perform.
Yeah. It was like I had to wear it for work, or I had to go to the wedding or the funeral. And so I had to wear this. And when you ask women why, they just honestly said, because beauty is pain and pain is beauty. Why do you do it? Because it looks hot. Because the shirt I can't breathe in looks hot. And it's a price I pay. By the way, I'm not judging anyone who does this, but I'm thinking, wow, that we feel like it's a free choice to wear clothes that literally hurt, like to wear clothes that literally keep us from being able to breathe. When I see a choice like that and someone says, my free choice, I always think, how free is that really? I love breathing in a nice pair of friend pants, but also let me say that I recognize some privilege in that statement, and you have some too, right? Neither of us have a job that requires us to wear certain kinds of clothing. And I don't mean just a uniform. I think there are a lot of women working in business, for example, where they have to look a certain way to get respect. And the way they do that is by being uncomfortable most of the day, most days.
I used to work at a champagne lounge, kind of like in the industry at night. And our uniform was not only all black, tight dresses, heels, but also a choker.
Wow. So that you're not surprised when the men do it later. Is that why? Sorry,
it definitely sends a message for sure. There's definitely a reason why certain things are considered sexy or sexual, like you said, not being able to run away in heels or having a choker around your neck.
When I wrote that op-ed, I got an email from a woman who was so pissed off at me about that. I don't know. It just really rubbed her the wrong way. And she goes, I can run just fine in my heels. Thank you very much.
You're like, want a race?
Are you kidding me? You can say, I like heels. They make me feel sexy and empowered. Or I like that I get treated better when I look taller. Like you can say all those things, but don't tell me you can run in high heels. there was a program, I don't know if people still do this, it's called Walk a Mile in Her Shoes. Have you ever heard of this? I think it was mostly on college campuses, and it was to raise awareness about sexual assault and also like money for programming around that. And so how it worked here is that at one end of campus, a bunch of women would set up a bunch of men with some high-heeled, like stiletto style shoes, and the men would walk down campus in them. I wasn't there for the event, but I saw a picture and some coverage later where one of the guys is just like laying flat on the ground at the end of it with his like feet in these heels, and you can just tell it hurts. And I remember like, this is a good guy, right? This is a guy who's trying to like make a difference. And I had this really uncharitable reaction to the picture. Like I went like, oh, does it hurt? Like, was that uncomfortable? You literally dipped your toes in, right, to the kind of pain that a lot of women have all the time.
There's a TikTok that went viral where a couple went to Vegas and she's wearing heels, and then she films him walking in her heels on the way back from the Vegas clubs, and she's wearing his like comfortable sneakers or whatever. And so, oh my God, it went so viral. There's like millions and millions of views, and all the comments are like, that's how you know he's the one. What a man, switches shoes with you, whatever. So I show my husband, okay? We're sitting on the couch. I show my husband. I'm like, babe, would you do this for me? And he goes, absolutely not. So I start punching him. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You wouldn't switch shoes with me if my feet were hurting. I have to wear heels, and I go off.
Violence is not the answer.
Yeah. In this case, you have to feel the pain, an ounce of it. So I'm like punching his arm, and he goes, no, babe, I would just walk barefoot in my socks. And I don't know why that like subtly shook me. I think it's just the fact that he sees the heels as this last resort, whereas we see it as this first instinct to be sexy. And to him, it was just like very apparent that like I would just like walk home in my socks. Why would I wear your heels? And to us, that's like a non-option.
I read a quote, I can't remember where, but it was about the history of heels and men's shoes, and it was basically pointing to this idea that men get to move around with their feet firmly on the ground. And there's a reason we would never ask men to wear shoes like that. They would do like your husband. They'd be like, are you insane? Like, I'm not doing that. I would rather wear my socks on the dirty floor. Like, I'd rather risk stepping on glass than put my feet into that shape. I think there are some people who, I know some men who really think that women's feet are just shaped that way. Like Barbies, you know, like that's just, of course they go in heels. That's just how they work. And yeah, I want to like be honest here. I used to wear heels. Oh, I loved it. I've always wanted to be tall. I'm just kind of average height. And I loved that tall feeling. I especially loved it in front of a class. I actually felt like I got palpably more respect when I looked tall. That's, judge me, fine, right? Also, pants are always made to fit with heels unless you're super tall. So like there are all these reasons. So the TMI here is that I have arthritis now. I cannot wear heels. Like I truly wouldn't be able to walk or stand. So I cannot wear heels. And so lately what I'll often do is wear my big puffy tennis shoes. And then maybe right before a talk or something, I'll change into some like sandals or something that's like a little bit not tennis shoes, but that I can still stand up in. And I've found myself more and more that I'll get there and I'll have my bag of other shoes and I'll just think, nah. It was a moment where I realized it felt so much better to feel solid, to feel like I was on solid ground and that I wasn't having to think about pain. It felt better to feel like that than it did to feel powerful or sexy. And if you don't ever try it, you won't know. I don't know. What if you did go out to the club in your tennis shoes?
I have a friend who only goes out to the club in her tennis shoes because she's Brazilian and she loves to dance.
I like how you said those two things like one follows the other. Like she's Brazilian, so of course she likes to dance.
A little positive stereotype, but she came to my bachelorette and she inspired all of us to go out in tennis shoes. And guess what we all did at my bachelorette on Saturday night? We danced. In your book, you have a chapter that's just called Tone It Down. This section on Tone It Down, I think, is equivalent to picking up the shit where you can. Could you talk more about like what inspired that and essentially what you see as the solution to individual beauty, sickness, healing?
I mean, I would be careful. Solution. I wish I had a solution. I don't have a solution. I have a bunch of little nudges that might help a little bit, right? That's kind of how I think about it. But I think it's everyone wants to look good, right? This is not, I'm not trying to tell people like never care about how you look. Like that's, I think it's part of being human. We want to look nice for special occasions. If you're on the dating market, it's just reality. Like you're going to want to attract people with your physical appearance. But I think that we don't need to have the volume turned up this high all the time. When I think about the things that a lot of young women do now, literally just to walk out the door in the morning, like just to feel minimally presentable, those would be the equivalent, 20, 30 years ago to prom night, right? That to like a really special effort kind of night. The kind of makeup that only ever got done for like fashion editorials, basically. Now a lot of people do every day. The number of products required for that like blows my mind, especially if you're trying to do the thing where you're doing that, but you want to not look like you're doing that. Then you need to be even better at it, because God forbid anyone know you're performing, right? Perform that you're not performing. I think any place where we can claw back a little time. I like that image. It's so visceral. And I think, yeah, claw back some of your time, claw back some of your money. And I bet there's a lot that you don't miss. I sometimes wear makeup and I sometimes don't. And God, when I get like the night for a day, the day I don't wear makeup, that night I'll have this moment and be like, oh yeah, I don't have to I don't have to like get makeup off my face before bed. I'll be like, nice work, past Renee. Like you really gave me a gift. There's also, I think there are beauty practices we do that we think other people notice. Like I get that you have to look a certain way at work sometimes, right? But I wonder if you couldn't peel back a few products, right? And no one would notice really. And you'd get a little bit of time and a little bit of money, a little bit of freedom back. I think for some people, one of the things you can do is just stop. You can't, Mary, sorry, but stop posting pictures of yourself on social media. Like there's no way to do that and not care about how you look for almost everybody. There might be some exceptions. Or when you go out with your friends, consider what it might be like to say, we're not going to document tonight. We're not going to do it. We're just going to go dance in our tennis shoes on the dance floor and let that be enough. Like let the memories live in our heads instead of on screens in public for other people's consumption, right? That's a way to claw back some of that energy too. There's a real freedom, I think, in doing that. I think we all want a little bit more of it. So you just have to find out what the right amount is for you. And I talk to some people who are like, listen, I love this shit. They're like, I will put on a full face of makeup for myself, staying home all day. I think that's usually not true, right? But maybe for some people it is. I think great. If you're happy, great. I'm talking to the people who feel like something is not quite right, who maybe want a little more friend pants time. If the idea of friend pants doesn't make sense, it could be because you don't have the right friends. I want to throw that out there too.
Yeah, this could be a whole separate hour-long conversation, but I often think about moms who say that like I use my skincare routine, my makeup, getting ready as like time for me away from my kids, like self-care. And I think that's particularly pesky because I completely understand it. Absolutely no judgment. And there's many, I can totally understand why like feeling beautiful in the midst of this like big life transition could put a pep in your step and also give you time away. And sometimes I wonder, well, what if you were reading or gardening or cultivating something different?
Or sleeping, right? And I hear that, and I think for some women that could be true, but I think for a lot of women, it's the only thing they feel allowed to do alone, right? When you're raising young children, it's like your only kind of self-care is this very socially acceptable, like, well, you don't want to let yourself go.
That just fucked me up.
So if your only kind of self-care is basically a process that makes you more palatable to other people, they'll let you do it. You can have time away from the kids if you're going to come out of that room hotter.
Right. Like if you're like, babe, can you watch the kids? I'm going to go get ready. Okay, fine. Babe, can you watch the kids? I'm going to go take a nap. Fuck you mean, you know?
It's probably very different. Yeah.
You are so cool.
Sorry, I'm laughing because that is not a word that people who know me would use to describe me. But wow, thanks.
Well, if you want to try to prove me wrong and then get to know each other better, I will not be opposed to that, but you are definitely so cool, and I can't imagine that changing. I just love that solution of toning it down and picking up the shit, not solution, sorry, the small micro step, picking up the shit where you can. The last thing I want to close with, we're coming up on time, but I just real quick need to share this. My husband, the same one that I was punching.
I assume you only have one.
Most days.
Scott, very interesting.
He, when I put on makeup, when I get ready, he's always kind of like, why? Like, it's fine. Like, it's okay. He's just so supportive in that way. And one little thing that broke my heart was I had like this face full of makeup. I was, looking hot and whatever. But of course that comes with like making sure my hair's not sticking to my lip gloss and feeling like hyper focused on the concealer bunching up at the eye lines and whatever. So I think it's distracting that way. But he was kind of kissing me weird. And I was like, what's going on? And he's like, I just feel like I can't kiss you because I don't want to mess up like all this hard work you did. And that just kind of like tore me into tiny shreds because I'm doing this whole process that I see as kind of like for me, for him, I don't know, whatever. And then he receives it as like, well, it actually creates a separation between us because I feel like I can't like kiss you in the full way that I want.
Yeah, you're untouchable now.
Oh, what a metaphor. Well, Dr. Renee, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners aside from get the book, Beauty Sick? It'll change your life.
Well, thank you. More friend pants. I feel like I get asked the like, what's the ending? What's the message? And I often do this like, wah, 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 like I just kind of fall apart at the end. But where I'm like, wait, I'm supposed to have a conclusion. I didn't write a conclusion. But no, today I have one. More friend pants. More time with people who make you feel like you can wear your friend pants, and you want to be with people who take that tension away, right? Find those people, be that person for others. So no more like catty, snarky judging. I'd be like, nope, friend pants zone. Like I've extended friend pants to even mean you don't have to clean your house out before your friends come over. Like I went to a friend's house and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, it's so messy. And I went like, friend pants. Make that a big metaphor. I'm glad I got to sneak in a lot of friend pants talk today.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your work, academic and beyond.
My pleasure. It was so great to be here.